Okay, welcome back to Strength Coach Tutorials, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this athlete dashboard that uses Z-scores and T-scores to pull out the values for your athletes and rank them against other team members. So as you can see, as I change athletes here, it's going to highlight that athlete in our team scoring sheet. It's going to show that athlete versus the team average and also show you a chart of where that athlete is weak and strong based on the different movements. This is going to be really powerful if you are creating any dashboards or providing any testing reports to your athletes. This is a really easy and powerful trick, and I'm excited to show you how to do it. So let's get after it. Okay, so we're back and we are starting off this project with a data set here that has a bench press 1RM, squat 1RM, deadlift 1RM, vertical, broad jump, and then a sprint. And all of this is just made up data that I made for the purposes of this video. And we're going to take this data and turn it into that dashboard that I showed you on the intro screen. And it's going to be a bit of a long process, and we're going to have to do a bunch of different calculations. So just bear with me. But at the end, you'll have a workable dashboard that you can use with any of your data. Now, just before we get right into this project, just a quick reminder that if you are finding any value in these videos, it really helps the channel grow if you can like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and then subscribe and turn on the bell notification, and that will tell you when I upload new videos. And I'm really trying to keep a consistent schedule of uploading every Monday and Wednesday. So without further ado, let's get into this project. So we're starting off with a data set, and like with most of our data sets that we've ever worked with in Strength Coach Tutorials, the first thing that we have to do is actually turn this into a table. So I'm going to highlight this whole data set, and then I'm going to hit Format as Table up here, and I'm just going to format it as a table, and I'm going to say my table has headers and hit OK. And we're going to name this table. If you remember how to do this, when I click anywhere on the table, I'll go to Table Design up here at the top, and then under Table Name, I'm just going to put TBL_athlete. Let's call it data, TBL_data, and I'll hit enter, and that names that table TBL_data. So now whenever we're referring to things within the table, it's going to make it a little bit easier for us to kind of do that. Now, before we get too far, we just have to do a little bit of basic stats on our data here. The first thing we want to calculate is an average. So I'm going to go down here just underneath the table, and I'm going to hit equals average, open that bracket up, and then if I click up here at the top of my table, you'll notice that it's going to select that whole column automatically, and that's the power of tables. You can see that it's automatically referencing TBL_data, bench press 1RM, and then when I close that bracket off and hit enter, it's going to give me the average value pretty easily. And because I've referenced the table, I should be able to just drag that across, and you can see that it's going to give me all of my averages because it knows to go one column over for our table. So I'm just going to center those and then decrease the decimals on them a little bit, and we'll give each one of them 2 decimal places. So that's the average. So then the next thing that we need to calculate is the standard deviation. And the standard deviation is just a measurement of how normalized the data is. And it gives us sort of our middle value that we can use above or below to figure out where athletes are in our normal distribution. So the way that we're going to calculate this is I'm just going to put equals and then STDEV, and it's going to pull up a bunch of formulas here. The one that we want is .p. And what that does is it calculates the standard deviation based on the entire population given as an argument, and then it ignores logical values and text. So that's the one that I want. And then when I open that up, it's going to ask me for number 1, number 2, number 3. And the same way that I did before, I'm just going to select the whole column and close that off. And it's going to give me my standard deviation, and I should be able to drag that over. And I'm going to center those, decrease the decimal places a little bit, and that will give me sort of my measurements of standard deviation. Now that we have those stats, the next thing that I actually want to calculate is what's called a Z-score. And a Z-score is how many standard deviations a measurement is above or below the mean. And what we'll do with this Z-score is actually use it as a measurement of where athletes fall in relationship to their team to let us understand what values they need to work on and then what values that they're very strong in. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add the same headings at the top, but I'm going to give them a Z underscore title so that we know that it's now the Z score of the bench press 1RM. So I'm just going to go and do this with a formula. So I'm going to type equals and then quotations, Z underscore quotations, and I'm going to pick the value where that cell is stored, C1, and hit enter. And you can see what it's done is it's just added Z underscore to my bench press 1RM, and I'm going to drag that across, and it gives me all of my titles now. So I have Z bench press 1RM, Z squat 1RM, Z deadlift 1RM, Z vert 1RM, and so on. And then when I copy these, and I'm going to paste just the values, so I'm going to hit right click and paste values, you can see that because we're using a table, it's going to automatically add those to our table. So now we have those titles in our table. And what I like to do whenever I'm doing calculated columns is I just highlight those in a different color so that I know that those contain calculations. From there, we're going to use a formula now to calculate the Z-score. So the formula that we're going to use is called standardize. So I'm going to put equals standardize and then open that up, and it's going to ask me for a few different things. So it's going to ask me for X, and the X value is going to be the value that we want to find the Z-score of. In this case, it's C2, the bench press score. Then it's going to ask me for the mean, and we've already calculated the mean down here in the average. So I'm going to calculate that, and I know that that's always going to be stored in row 34. So I'm going to put a $sign in front of that and lock that in, and that's going to allow me to drag the formula down. And then it's going to ask me for the standard deviation, and we've already calculated that as well. And I know that that's going to be stored in row 33, so I'm going to $sign lock that in, close it off, hit enter, and you're going to see that it's calculated the standard deviations for all of those cells. Now if we look, what it's given us is an actual value of, for in this case, these athletes all have 110 as their bench press, and our mean is 83. So their score is 0.75 standard deviations above the mean. So what that means is they are better than the average by 0.75. Now down here we have athletes that are worse than the average. For example, athlete 30 is 1.3 standard deviations worse than the average for this group. So that's just going to give us a measurement that we can now compare athletes versus each other. And if I drag this over, what it's going to do is, because we locked those in, it's going to automatically go to the squat 1RM, and I can now double click there and it will copy it all the way down, and I can do the same thing, double click, and it'll copy it all the way down. I can do the same thing all the way across so that we get all of our Z-scores kind of filled in. And this just goes to show that when you write good formulas and make sure that you lock in the right values, the rest of the actual data analysis is pretty easy. It's just a matter of copying the formulas into the right spots. And I'm just going to change all these values to be 1 decimal place, just it looks a little bit better to me. Now, so that's the Z-scores. And then the next thing that we're going to do is actually calculate what's called a T-score. And a T-score is essentially taking the Z-score and putting it onto a scale of 100. So what that means is that the mean, or if an athlete was right at the mean, their value would be 50, and then we would add standard deviations above that to give them a score out of 100, or if they were lower than the mean, we would take away standard deviations to give them still a score out of 100. So there's a formula for this, but the first thing I need to do is create the T titles. So in the same way that we did the Z titles here, I'm just going to go back and change this to T underscore in C1. and hit enter and drag that across. And I'm going to copy those and paste values here at the end. And you're going to see it's going to add those to our actual table again. And I'm going to color those in a different color because those are a different calculated field. And the formula for the Z-score is for the T-score is we take the Z-score, times it by 10, and then we add 50 to it because 50 is the mean. So what this looks like in practice is if I go equals bracket 10 times the actual Z-score that we're looking at, and then I close that bracket and add 50 to it and hit enter, you can see now that it's taken those Z-scores and converted them all to a value out of 50, out of 100. So you can see that athletes that have a really powerful Z-score, 1.45 here, their value is now 64 out of 100, or 65 out of 100 for this athlete. And if we wanted to kind of check to see that that was working, we could give an athlete, say, an outlier value here, say, I don't know, 250. And you can see now that it's changed everything and their score has gone way up to 85. So that's changed the whole scale of things, and they have a very high score now of 85. So I'm going to just Control Z and put it back to normal. And then I forgot one more thing. So in the case of sprints, because a lower time is actually better, so you can see this athlete has a 1.62, and we know that that's a better score than a 2.12 in the case of seconds. The thing that we have to do for the Z-scores in this case is we actually just have to multiply this by -1. So we just have to change the scale essentially. So when I multiply this by -1, all the negatives are going to become positive and all the positives are going to become negative. So if I hit enter, you can see basically that all the values have just flipped. And now this score is on scale a better score. So whenever you're working with sprints, and the values are actually better if they're lower, you're just going to want to multiply that whole Z-score by -1. So again, we've set up our formulas really well, so I should be able to drag this across and it should work. And it does. And then I will just copy all of those down by clicking the box in the corner. And if I wanted to check to see if this was correct, what I could do is if I paste the actual average, so if I were to take the average formula equals average and take that column and hit bracket, the average should always be 50. And that tells me that these T-scores are now on a scale of 100 because the middle value is always going to be 50. Okay. So that's just an easy way to check to make sure that your T-scores are accurate. So now that we have all of these scores kind of completed, what we want to do is actually now take these and graph them so that we can use them on graphs, and it will make all the scales look the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to another chart, and I'm actually going to copy these titles because I'm going to pull these titles back out. So if I go over to this sheet here, I'm going to paste those titles in, and I'll make it just a little bit bigger so that we can see all of them. And I'm going to copy the other ones as well. And I'm going to paste those in here as well. And I know I'm going to want the average for that one because I've done this already. And I'm going to merge these cells because I'm going to put an athlete selection in there. So we're setting up our data here. The first thing that I want to do is I want to actually add a drop-down menu so that we can select the athlete that we want to look at. So I'm going to use a data validation that we've done in so many different videos. So I'm going to select that cell, go to data validation, go to list equals indirect, and I'm going to reference the table. So I'm going to go quotations, table, underscore data, square bracket, athlete name, square bracket, quotation, and normal bracket, and close that off and hit OK. And that now pulls out all of the athletes in the athlete name column, and I should be able to select any one of those athletes. Now, what I want to do is, based on the athlete that I select, I want to pull out their scores. So what I'm going to need to use is a filter function that I've shown you how to use in other videos. So I'm going to put equals filter and open that up, and the array that I want to look at is going to be TBL underscore data, and I'm going to open up that bracket, and we already know what it's going to be, T underscore bench press, and I'm going to close that off. And then what do I want to actually include? I want to include all of the cells where TBL underscore data, athlete name, close that off, and I want to include them if they equal B2, which is actually where we're going to store our athlete. So I'm going to store that in there. And what do I want? If it's empty, I just want it to show a blank value, and when I close that off, you can see it's now going to pull that out. Now, because we're using a table reference, there's no way to lock in a table reference with the $signs. So when I drag this over, it will move the T bench press over to T squat, but it will also move the T athlete name over. So I need to lock in this T athlete name. So the way to do that with a table reference is where it says square bracket athlete name, I'm going to put another square bracket in front of there, and then I'm going to put double dots after it, open up another set of square brackets, go down to athlete name, select that, and close both square brackets off and hit enter. So what this is saying is that I only want to reference table data from athlete name to athlete name. So it's not going to, when I drag the formula over, keep going over with the table reference. So I'll hit enter, and I should be able to drag this right across, and it should give me all of my T values. And if we remember what the actual average was for any T value, we know that it's going to be 50, so I'm just going to put 50 in each one of these boxes, because every time we calculate a T value, it's automatically going to be 50. So now that I have these values pulled out, we can check to see if they're working. If I switch my athlete here, it should switch all of the values, and indeed it is. So now we take this and we actually make our chart. So I'm going to copy all of these. Whoops. I'm going to copy all of these. And from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert recommended charts, and it's not giving me one that I want, so I'll go to all charts, and I like an area, or sorry, a radar chart for this, and a radar chart that actually has an area associated with it. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to pull this chart over here, and I'll delete the chart title. And what I'm going to do is actually change how this chart looks a little bit. I like this one here. Actually, no, we're going to go with a different one. This one's the one that I like to use. And so you can see now, I just bolded those out, that this is starting to look like the chart in the video or in the intro screen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another series to this chart. And all I'm going to do is hit right click and go to select data. And where it says series 1, what I'm going to do is just edit that series, and I'm going to give it the name of the athlete that we've selected. So that's now going to be called athlete 14, and then I'm going to add a series. The series name that I want is going to be where I put average, and the series values are going to be all of the 50s that we have for average, and I'm going to hit OK. And I like it when the series average is actually a blue color. So when I select this series, I can go to format, shape fill, I can give it a blue color, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit transparent. So I've just gone to more colors, and then there's a transparency option, and you can select about 50%, and I'll give the outline a blue color as well. And then I like it when the athlete's values are actually red. So I can select red, go to more fill colors, give that a 50% red or a transparency, and then I'm going to outline that actually in black. So I think that looks pretty good. The last thing that I have to do now is just change this scale, because we want it out of 100. So if I double click there, it's going to pull open the format axis, And the maximum value I want that to show is actually 100 because that would be the max score that somebody could get. And I'll hit enter there. And it just changes around the scale of our actual graph. And we can make sure that it's working because I should be able to select any athlete, and now you can see their values versus the rest of the people on the team based on their actual T-scores. And because there's no negative values associated with T-scores, this now looks really good. And it's an easy visual for us to look at. We can see this athlete particularly is a little bit better than the team average in broad jump, a little bit better in sprints, a little bit better in squats. They struggle a little bit in their bench press. So if we were training this athlete, we might want to get them to work a little bit more on their bench press. So that's the first part of our visualization. The next part is going to be the Z-score. So I'm going to use pretty much the same formula. So I can copy this formula up here. I'm going to hit Control C and then come down here, Control V. And now, because everything's referenced in the same spot, the only thing I actually have to change is my table reference. So I'm going to delete this part where it says T bench press. I'm going to open that back up, and now I want Z bench press. So there's the bench press, and I'll close that off and hit enter, and it's going to give me now my Z-score values, and I'll drag that all the way across because the references have not changed. I'm going to move this down because in the intro video I actually had this a little bit lower. And now I'm going to create a chart out of this in the same way that we just did with the last one. I'll highlight all of these values. I'm going to go to Insert, Recommended Charts, and I actually like this clustered column chart for this style. I'm going to drag this up. Let's give this a little bit more space here. Drag this up, make it about the same size as the other chart. I'm going to delete the chart title because I don't think we need that. Bold this, and then we're going to give this a little bit different kind of shape. No, you know what? We'll stay with that one, and then we're just going to change the color a little bit. So I'm going to take these columns and I'm going to give them a red color, outline them in no outline, and we'll go to more colors, and I'm going to give them about a 50% transparency. And now you can see that this athlete particular is not so good at the bench press, not very good at the broad jump in relationship to his teammates, and then but they're very good at the other spots. So if we were to select a different athlete, all of these charts should automatically update, and it looks really good. So let's just take these, and I'm going to give them a little bit of series overlap. So if I double click on these, we can go to series options, and we'll take the gap width away a little bit. And what you can see is it actually changes how big the bars are. So I think that looks pretty good right there. I'm going to bold the text and maybe make it a little bit bigger. And now we have a nice kind of chart that shows our athlete values in terms of what they need to work on. Then the last piece of this puzzle is we're going to actually create a total athlete score. So I'm going to go back to my data, and the way that I like to do this, I'm going to add one more column, and I'm just going to call it TSA for total score of athleticism. And this is out of the Anthony Turner paper from 2019. And the way that I like to calculate this is I'm just going to total up all of the T scores into one score out of, I guess in this case, 600. So I'm going to put equals sum and select all of these T scores, and then close those brackets off. And now you can see that it's given each one of our athletes a TSA. And if I wanted to make this a nicer number, I could just wrap this whole thing in an M round and put a quotation or a comma at the end. And I want it to round it to 0.5 multiple and hit OK. And you can see now it's given everyone, it's rounded everyone to a 0.5 multiple. So that's my TSA. I'll give that another color on my chart so that I know that I've calculated that. So I'm going to actually pull out those values for all of the athletes. So I'm going to pull out all the athletes. So I want TSA team, TSA athlete. I'll make these a little bit, or I'll bold these a little bit, and I'm going to make them in the center. And I'm going to use a trick here. right click here, I'll go down to Format Cells, and under Alignment, there's an option called Shrink to Fit. And what that does is it just automatically shrinks the text based on the values that are inside of it. So if I was to type something that's really long, it's going to automatically shrink the text down so that it fits in the cell. So I'll put TSA athlete back. And then I need to pull out all of my athletes. So I'm going to use a function called unique equals unique. And I want all of the table athletes. So TBL underscore data athletes. Close that off. I'll pull out all of my athletes. And I want to actually be able to pull out all of their scores. So the function I'm going to use for this is a sum ifs, and I'm going to only pull out their score if it's not the athlete that I'm looking for, because I want them on a different graph, and I'll show you why in a second. So how this is going to look is it's going to be equals sum ifs. Open that up. The sum range that we want is TBL data and then TSA. And the criteria that we want is actually table data athlete name, and we want that to be equal to the athlete that we've pulled out, in this case B11. And the second criteria that we want is TBL data athlete name, and we want it not equal to the athlete that we've selected. So the way that we do this is we go quotations, double arrows opening up towards each other, and the and sign, the B2 where we've actually stored this athlete, and we need to lock it in, so it's $B $2, and then we close this off, hit OK, and because this is a dynamic array, it will actually go all the way down, or at least it should. Oh, if I just double click it, it will do that. So I just drag this down and it goes all the way down. So you can see that it's pulled out the total score for the athlete as long as it's not the one that we've selected. So if I were to change the athlete that we actually select, let's go to say athlete 8, you can see that it changes and doesn't pull out their score. Now we have to put a function in the next box that actually pulls out their score. So what this looks like is equals if, and the if that we want is if this athlete here equals the athlete that we've selected. So it's $B $2. And if it does, what we want to do is actually look up their value. So X lookup, open that up. The value that we want to look up is B12. Okay, sorry, no, B11. So that's the value that we actually want to look up. And where do we want to look it up? In the table data, athlete name. And what do we want to return? Table data, TSA. Close that off. And then if not found, we just want it to be blank. The match mode, we want an exact match, so that's a 0, comma, close that off. And then the last thing, if the value is false for our if statement, we just want it to be blank, and I'm going to close that whole thing off. So what's this formula doing? It's saying if the athlete in the list here is equal to the one we've selected, then I want you to actually look up their value and pull it out. If not, just leave the whole thing blank. And I'm going to hit enter, and it's not going to look like it does anything, but as soon as I drag it down all the way, you can see that it's only pulled out that one athlete's value. And we can check to see if this is working, because if I change my athletes, that value should just kind of go up. So from here, we just have to make one more graph. So I'm going to select all of these values here, and I'm going to hit insert, recommended charts, and I actually want this clustered bar chart. I'll hit OK, and I'm going to bring this over close to where my other values are. I'm going to take away this chart area so that you can see the whole thing. I'm going to make this big. So athlete 1, 2, 3, we can see all of the athletes. I'll take away the team value because that's pretty self-explanatory. And I'm going to add one more set of values to this. I'm going to right click here, select data, add the name that we want to add is TSA athlete, and the series values is going to be this whole sort of column here. Where'd that go? All the way from athlete 1 to 30, and I'm going to hit OK. And you can see that it's now added that athlete's values, and as I change athletes, it will actually highlight only that athlete. So then just a little playing around with the format here, and we can make this look really good. So if I select my bar charts here and right click on them, the series overlap that looks really good with something like this is if I go to 100% on series overlap and then a gap width of around 10%. So you can see now this looks pretty good, and I'm going to highlight the athlete that we've selected. So I'm going to make their shape actually red with no outline, and I'm going to make everyone else's blue but make it transparent, the same way that we have done before, and again no outline. So you can see that now it's just highlighted only their values, and as I select a new athlete, it's going to highlight only their values in red. So that's really how you create a simple athlete dashboard. What did we do? We calculated some Z-scores and then we graphed that. We calculated some T-scores and graphed that. And then we added up all of our T-scores and created a total athlete score, and we've graphed that. And we've just created some simple visualizations that allows you to look at it quite easily. And this is just a really easy way to kind of do that. If you wanted to get fancy, we could just hide all these calculations and then have a slicer or something up here so you could only see the graphs that you've created. But to me, this looks pretty good. You can use your own imagination on colors and different schemes and things like that to make it look the way that matches your team. But this is really just an easy way to create a simple dashboard based on your testing data. Because we've used table references and all of our formulas are for the most part dynamic, we should be able to keep adding values basically indefinitely, and it should keep updating our charts to reflect the new values. So I hope this trick helps you out and that you create some of these dashboards. If you create anything like this, tag me in it. Show me on Twitter or Instagram or wherever you're kind of making it. I love to see that people are creating some of the projects that I come up with on Strength Coach Tutorials. And then don't forget that if you have any ideas for projects, there will be a survey in the description below that you can actually put in an idea for a sheet. And if I use it in a future video, I will send you the sheet. So thanks for checking out the video, and I will see you in the next one.